Don't hesitate to let me know if you can't hear me. I have a tendency to speak softly, but it's not my fault. I have a very soft voice. Right? It'll help you to let me know that you can't hear. As I mentioned before the sermon, this conference is about, well, conference is sort of a big word. So I'm going to talk to a few words about the new Mass in light of the decrees of the Council of Trent. As you know, the Council of Trent published many decrees on various subjects, on the justification of souls, on reform of the church. And there's in the 22nd section of the Council of Trent, there was several chapters on the Mass. And when you read these decrees, you would think they were written for us today. Well, yes, we'll see. And it's not surprising because the Council of Trent was called in reaction to the Protestant heresies at the time. And so, since the new Mass is the Protestantization of the real Mass, we're going to see that the same errors have been repeated. And they say themselves, this is one quote of Dominican, and he's nicknamed the great architect of the new Mass, because he's the one, Father Guini was the one behind the new Mass, and since he's been suspected of, it's almost true that he was a Freemason, call him the great architect of the new Mass. So he says already about the changes in 1965, even before the new Mass, talking about because the new Mass was actually progressive. It was started step by step, but already in 65 he was talking about these changes. He says, the desire to ease in every way the path of union for separated brothers, that is the Protestants, led the Church to make these difficult sacrifices, removing any stumbling block that could even slightly present an obstacle or a cause for discomfort for the heretics. In other words, anything that's explicitly Catholic, all that the Council of Trent ordered the priests to observe scrupulously in celebrating the Mass in order to protect themselves and the faithful against the Protestant heresy. So let's look at the decrees one by one and comparing them to the Mass. Actually, we won't see all, but first of all, a decree about the Masses in honor of the saints. I'm quoting the Council. And though the Church has been accustomed to celebrate at times certain Masses in honor and memory of the saints, she does not teach that sacrifice is offered to them, but to God alone, who crowned them. Whence the priest does not say, to thee, Peter or Paul, I offer sacrifice, but giving thanks to God for the victories, he implores their favor, that they may vouchsafe to intercede for us in heaven, whose memory we celebrate on earth. So, contrary to what the Protestants think, when we celebrate Mass in honor of St. Peter or St. Paul, we're not offering them a sacrifice as if to an idol. No, we're offering the sacrifice to God, but asking at the same time to help us through the intercession of the saints that we are honoring. And, so this is just a reminder that this Mass is celebrated in their honor. It's not the sacrifice is not offered to them. And this is why in Masses for the saints, mention is always made of their merit. It's very often in the traditional missal. Here, like just yesterday was the case with the feast of St. Louis, where we ask by the intercession and it's, O God, who brought St. Louis from the terrestrial reign to the celestial reign in heaven, grant that we, by his intercession, in his merits, we may be brought to the glory of the reign of your Son in heaven. I don't know what it is, but exactly the exact words, but it's there comes the word merit, talking about the saints comes very often in the prayers, the orations for each Mass. However, for Braga, Father Braga, who was the secretary of Father Bernini, he said that the language had to change. In presenting the new sanctoral, as you know, in the calendar, there's the sanctoral, and then there's the temporal. The temporal part of the liturgical calendar is all the feasts that go along with the seasons, Christmas, Pentecost, things like that. And then there's the Sanctoral, which is the calendar of the saints' feasts. And he mentioned why the Sanctoral needed to be revamped. Ecumenical requirements, that is, measures in order to eliminate anything that separates us from the Protestants, the ecumenism, praying with the Protestants. Ecumenical requirements dictated appropriate revisions in language. Devotional aspects or particular ways of venerating and invoking the saints have been left behind by an entirely new foundation of Eucharistic theology. Retouching the text, moreover, was deemed necessary to bring to light new values and new perspectives. So they admit that there's a new, and actually, I didn't quote it here, but just before in the saint's text, he mentions that these changes are doctrinal changes and not just accidental changes in detail. And anyway, practically speaking, what does that mean? What has been changed in the new missal? 30 prayers that spoke of the merit of the saints have been replaced with other prayers. In 21 other of these prayers where the word merit was in the prayer, the word merit has been just suppressed. They kept the prayer, but they took out the word merit. And in the 13 other prayers that remain, talking about the merit of the saints, 10 of them have become optional. So out of 63 prayers that talk about the merit of saints in the new missal, now only 3 of them are actually untouched and always said. And the list of the saints invoked during the memento of the living and the memento of the dead during the canon have been, well, let's say they're no longer recited. They still exist in the Eucharistic prayer, the first Eucharistic prayer, but they're in brackets, and so they're optional and they're almost never said. Second decree is about the sanctity of the canon. Actually, it's the part of the Mass that never changes. It's after the Sanctus. It's the part that's called the canon because it has never changed over 1300 years. The canon of the Mass. And since it is becoming that holy things be administered in a holy manner, and of all things this sacrifice is the most holy, the Catholic Church, to the end that it might be worthily and reverently offered and received, instituted many centuries ago the Holy Canon, which is so free from error that it contains nothing that does not in the highest degree savor of a certain holiness and piety, and raise up to God the minds of those who offer. For it consists partly of the very words of the Lord, partly of the traditions of the apostles, and also of pious regulations of holy pontiffs. And so we need to consider the canon as something full of holiness and piety. It raises the minds of the priests who celebrate the Mass to God. Especially, we must recognize that it is free from error. It is so free from error that it contains nothing that does not in the highest degree. Later, at the end of the decrees, there's a list of canons. They call them canons. They're just short phrases where they say, I'll read you the canon. If anyone says that the canon of the Mass contains errors and is therefore to be abrogated, let it be anathema, and is separated from the Church. I read the whole thing because I want you to see the arrogance of the reformers who are behind the new Mass, the way they speak of this hallowed canon of the Mass. Bonini and his collaborators see things differently. Bonini said that to use the Roman canon represents a deplorable impoverishment that is a typical result of centuries of liturgical decadence. Another one, Emmy House, who actually worked more closely on this particular part of the Mass. We're actually lucky to know who works on each part of the Mass, because there were study groups that were assigned. There was one study group that was assigned to revamp the canon, other ones to redo the epistles and the Gospels. Another group was instituted to work on the offertory, etc. So we know who did it. So, and luckily for us, they wrote articles explaining why they took the changes. In any case, Father Eminhouse, I forget what order he's from, but I think he was a Benedictine, but I could be mistaken. He said, I'm speaking of the canon, the defects were many. The most striking was its poverty of content. And the lists of saints were utterly uninspiring. And then another one, Vagagini. Actually, Vagagini is the big responsible, was responsible for the canons, the new Eucharistic prayers as they call them now. The present Roman canon sins in a number of ways against those requirements of good liturgical composition and sound liturgical sense that were emphasized by the Second Vatican Council. So the first answer to these reformers is, we can say with the Council, if anyone says that the canon of the Mass contains errors and is therefore to be abrogated, let it be anathema. So let them be anathema. Unfortunately, they didn't just content themselves to say that the canon of the Mass contains errors. They actually did abrogate it. They replaced the canon with several, what they call Eucharistic prayers at the choice of the priest, as you know. Just one example, the second Eucharistic prayer, Eucharistic Prayer 2, which is actually the most commonly used because it's the shortest, so they use it, they choose it often. It's presented as the canon of Saint Hippolytus of Rome, dating from the beginning of the 3rd century. However, it's pretty much sure today. This is the current state of the archaeology shows us that this, what they call the canon of Hippolytus of Rome, is neither from Saint Hippolytus, nor from Rome, nor from the beginning of the 3rd century. It's probably from a little bit later. And this Eucharistic prayer number 2 that they present as being this text from the 4th century, from the beginning of the 3rd century. It's probably from the late 3rd century or beginning of the 4th century. It only contains a few cut-up sentences from the original text. It's not even the original text. They just cut out the parts that interested them and sort of glued it together. And the final editing of this text was done hastily one evening in a Roman restaurant on a table, because they were in a hurry. They had to give it to the Pope the next morning. So I don't know how late they stayed up doing it, but and it's the author himself, it's Father Bouillet himself, who recounts this in his memoirs. So it's sacred prayers that have remained substantially the same thing since the time of the apostles, and which have been handed down for over 13 centuries without even changing this, without the slightest modification, without even changing the word. The last words that were added were by St. Gregory in the late 6th century, before 600. That's untouched. So these sacred prayers were replaced by a text more or less improvised in a Roman restaurant by a small group of monasteries. And so that's just one. Let's not even talk about the Eucharistic prayers for children. I left that in the car. I was going to read it. I have the text. But it's not worth reading this, because it's basically modernist theology translated into baby talk. It's like the priest says, oh Lord, you are so big and good, we thank you for the creation. And then the children are supposed to respond, oh Lord, thank you. And then the priest says another phrase, and there's like 4 phrases like that, and then up it's the consecration. It's a horrible to even think about. But that's the decree on the canon of the Mass. Now the canon on the ceremonies and rites of the Mass. The Council states, since the nature of man is such that he cannot, without external means, be raised easily to meditation on divine things, Holy Mother Church has instituted certain rites, namely that some things in the Mass be pronounced in a low tone and others in a louder tone. She has likewise, in accordance with apostolic discipline and tradition, made use of ceremonies such as mystical blessings, lights, incense, vestments, and many other things of this kind, whereby both the majesty of so great a sacrifice might be emphasized, and the minds of the faithful excited by those visible signs of religion and piety to the contemplation of those most sublime things which are hidden in this sacrifice. So it's just a reminder of basic human psychology. We need external things to excite us to piety. All these signs of the cross, reflections, all these rites and gestures. All you need to do is to walk into a Protestant church and remind them of the necessity of having statues of saints and incense and candles. And I was in Scotland a few weeks ago, and someone was telling me, they were talking about there was a recent ecumenical project where it was during Christmas time, and the children from each catechism class would go, each Sunday they go to a different church. So one Sunday in the Catholic church there was a group of Protestant children that assisted at the Mass, and it was a Novus Ordo church, but there was still a few candles left, and a few flowers in the altar, and the children the Protestant children had never seen a lit candle in their church before, and they asked the Protestant minister that the next time that they could have candles and flowers, and I said, well, great, maybe just 2 candles. We started with 2 candles, and well, in any case, we need this stuff. And the Novus Ordo Missae, the new Mass, has done away with the majority of all these sacred rites. First of all, the silence during the Mass is replaced by continuous noise and talking. The signs of the cross have been reduced, practically eliminated. During the canon, in the traditional Mass, there are 26 signs of the cross. In the new Mass, there is 1 single sign of the cross. The genuflections have been reduced from 5 to 2. And by the way, the Pope during his Mass doesn't even do these 2. There's the abolition of the kissing of the altar, and then the priest kisses the altar because the altar represents Christ. The abolition of the profound inclinations. The beautiful rite of incensing the altar, along with the accompanying prayers that go along with it. Done away with. Obviously, the vestments are no longer the same. Most of the vestments, the traditional vestments, were literally thrown in the garbage bin. And in our friary, pretty much, I would say 80% of the vestments that we have in our sacristy were recovered from the parishes that were either literally recovered from the bin, or the night before, when sometimes the faithful were. This all happened in the 70s and the 80s. The first priests of our community, they would go around to recover they would be alerted by the faithful, and they knew that the modernist pastor was going to throw away either had thrown away or was going to throw away the vestments. So we had just recently in France, I was in Le Puy Notre Dame for pilgrimage. And we were staying in the former seminary, obviously closed today. It's now a hotel. Well, a hotel, it's now a sort of a hostel for pilgrims. So we were staying there, and the upper grange, or the upper room was unlocked, and I discovered there was piles and piles of beautiful vestments laying on the floor. Apparently they're doing their house to cleaning or whatever, and they were just vestments there on the floor, in a pile of cut up vestments. You can tell that they'd cut out the designs, the beautiful embroideries and things, and just left the rest of the floor. And so now we have a few new vestments for our community, because we didn't go home empty-handed. So about these ceremonies and rites of the Mass, the Council of Trent doesn't just talk about it in general. It actually singles out one sacred rite in particular, the mixture of the water with the wine. As you know, at the Mass, when the priest pours the wine in the chalice, he also pours in just a drop of water. And it's a very ancient rite. It's a very, it has a mystical meaning. The water represents the people, and you bless the water, and you put one drop, and you're supposed to become a member of, the wine represents Christ, and the drop of water is the faithful that by supernatural grace enter into the mystical body of Christ and are sort of absorbed into Christ by grace. And so they mention this, right? The Holy Council in the next place calls to mind that the Church has instructed priests to mix water with the wine that is to be offered in the chalice. Because it is believed that Christ the Lord did this, it's actually probable that our Lord himself did this at the Last Supper. And also because from his side there came blood and water. It's another mystical signification of this, right? The memory of this mystery is renewed by this mixture, and since in the Apocalypse of St. John, the people are called waters, he compares the people of the world as the mighty waters that are being shook up by the waves. The union of the faithful people with Christ, their head, is represented. In the new Mass, they have kept this rite, but with a very significant difference. They suppress the blessing of the water beforehand. The priest just takes the water, just any plain water, not blessed, and dumps it in and pours a drop into the wine. It might seem like a very meaningless difference, but it has a meaning, because the drop of water is the Christian people who must unite themselves to our Lord, represented by the wine, but only after a purification and a blessing, having been elevated by divine grace to be worthy to enter into the mystical body of Christ. In the new Mass, when it's just annual water that's not blessed goes into this, that represents more so the modernist idea of universal salvation, even without supernatural grace. Well, they actually deny supernatural grace. Mankind is united to God just as is. So by the fact of being human, as John Paul II said, as he wasn't the first to say it, but as he liked to remind people that Christ, by his very incarnation, united himself to all mankind. And it's almost by being man, and that was basically the theology of John Paul II, is it? Christ came to reveal mankind to mankind. And that's actually a site quotation from him. Christ came to reveal mankind to mankind, to show men how to be more human, and it's being more human that will be more Christ-like. That's a whole other subject. But in any case, oftentimes there's a little change in the new Mass that might seem innocent, but it isn't. Next, well, it's not next, but we're going to skip a few things. The Council talks about the Mass celebrated in the vernacular. The decree asks to keep the Latin, obviously, and to explain. So the Mass should be said in Latin, but these mysteries that the people won't understand because it's in Latin should be explained in the sermons. That's and it explains why it must be conserved Latin. It's clear that using the vernacular for the prayers of the Mass diminishes their sacred character. Also, Latin preserves unity in the Church from one country to another. This is the perfect example today. I'm coming from France. I said the Mass exactly how we say it every day, every morning in France, and yet you knew exactly what's going on at the Mass. But especially the Latin is a rampart against heresies, by its precision and its unchanging vocabulary. And this is precisely why heretics start always by eliminating the Latin. It's the first thing they're going to try to do is to say the liturgy in the vernacular. Because in translating the prayers, they can change their meaning and introduce their errors. And that's exactly what the modernists did with the new Mass. when it's said in the vernacular. One example, well, two examples. As I mentioned earlier, the modernists deny the necessity, or sometimes even the existence of supernatural grace. And so when the texts of the, well, I was going to say the temple, but they don't call it the temple anymore, they call it the ordinary time. The texts, all the masses that are not feasts of the saints. In that part of the missal, the word gratia, the Latin word gratia, still appears in the text, in the new missal, 11 times. So I don't think anybody here, you don't need to be an expert to know how to translate gratia in English. It's the word grace. And yet when they translated it for the English-speaking countries, and then for the missals for the new Mass, the word grace disappeared. It doesn't appear even one time. They've translated gratia by something else. To slowly condition the faithful to no longer think of supernatural grace, because for them it doesn't even exist. Another example is a big example, the translating pro multis by for all. Well, it's another whole other story, which is a very, very grave area, which can affect the validity of the Mass. So, anyway, in conclusion, let us appreciate the traditional liturgy that we have. It's worthy of veneration, and so let us show our respects. These decrees of the Council of Trent are not just for the priests, it's for the faithful in the pews as well. To appreciate these sacred ceremonies, silence and seriousness when we're in church, especially during the ceremonies. I know here it's kind of tough, it's not a real church. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that we're in a church. One day, hopefully soon, we'll get another Mass venue. There'll be more real church. But that's why it's going to require of us a bit more attention in that respect, to respect the sacred place. Turn off our portable phones. I didn't hear any today. I'm really happy. But that happens even in traditional chapels. You can hear a portable phone going off in the middle of Mass. Think about dressing up for Sunday. To make the signs of the cross. Remembering that these signs of the cross have been suppressed in the new Mass. Say we have a sign of the cross to make it with respect. Make a good genuflection. Study the Mass. We need to, as the Council said, we need to keep the Mass in Latin, but then that requires of us, well, of the priests as well, to instruct the faithful, but it requires of us a little bit of effort to read the Missal, to study the Mass. There's a lot of good books explaining the rites of the Mass. It helps you better attend Mass when you know what's going on. And then, if we can't, make reparation for the lack of respect and the blasphemies that go on in the new Mass. Blasphemies against the real presence and lack of respect. We can make sacrifices and make reparation for that. We need to. We're going to stop there because it's basically what I want to say today. And we're a bit behind on schedule, I think. Just say that for prayer.